But I do think that the kind of horror that the show is not necessarily the same kind of horror that the book is.
Right. I agree.
I think the show tends to lean into bigger, flashier scares and tenser moments, and bigger payoffs. And the book is all about creeping dread. It's all about the thing unseen. It's all about the implication of something scary. It's in that way, the vibe of the horror is just slightly different. It's like slightly different enough to where if you're a big fan of this book, you might be frustrated to see this kind of adaptation.
I want to say one thing really quickly too, though, just for the listener, is that Luke has only seen half the show. So he's seen 5 episodes, and like we haven't really been at the house all that much. Welcome, guests, to episode 187 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week, we discuss the first 5 episodes of Mike Flanagan's 2018 series, The Haunting of Hill House. So I'm so excited to talk about this project with you, Luke. We are now onto the show, and I had already seen it, but it's been a lot of fun for me to revisit after now reading the source material. And I just wanted to know, like, are you spooked out enough? How are you feeling?
No, it's been good. The show has a oppressive atmosphere to it. It has a look to it. My wife walked, like, this is not her kind of show, right? But she walked in and just for a moment, like, watched and like something spooky happened. You know, some sort of, you know, jump scare happened. You know, there was some sort of manifestation. And it just kind of told me, like, this show is almost classic horror in a way. Like, it's done well, but it has a very classic feel. It swings big. And I think it is both a feature and a detriment a little bit, which we can get into. But the show has a lot going for it, and it definitely is scary. Even from the other room, you know, it was, you know, there's loud noises, there's screams, there's lots of sounds in this that are disturbing. So even from the other room, my wife is like hearing stuff. She's like, "That sounds terrifying." Why would you watch that?
I went back and because this isn't the first time we've covered something by Mike Flanagan. We covered Dr. Sleep, which was its own entire thing. He was trying to adapt like a sequel to Kubrick's film and Stephen King's novel, like adapt Stephen
There's
King's
a lot of
novel.
shared DNA here too, especially after seeing Dr. Sleep. I can see a lot of why they chose him, honestly, because this came before. So why they chose him for Dr. Sleep, why he got that gig. I can see why, and I can see why people thought it's a good fit.
Yeah, he kind of does this thing with this show where he's expanded it and modernized it by talking about things like mental illness and things that weren't being talked about at the time of the novel being written, really, and like tying that into some of the horror elements. And we'll get more into that stuff though. So I went back to listen to our Dr. Sleep coverage, and I realized I didn't talk too much about Mike Flanagan, so I would like to talk about him more in this episode. But I also, part of the thing that I read in that episode said that he wasn't necessarily known for jump scares. And I was like, what? I like watching the show. I was thinking about how, like,
there's lots of jump scares in this show, I would say.
It's not even like it's not jump scares of like creatures necessarily. It's the editing. It's the way that, you know, like there's like hard cuts to things with loud noises and things like that.
Loud noises. If you have a hard cut and a loud noise, I'm sorry, that's a jump scare. Right. You might want to pretend like it's not, but it is.
I agree. And so I remember when I was listening to this Dr. Sleep episode, I was like, damn, like that's not really very true. So definitely wanted to pull that back a little bit. He's kind of leaning into that. He's in this interesting territory, like you talked about, where he's like simultaneously making sort of a mid-2000s horror film, but while at the same time and I'm saying mid 2000s horror film as like the ones that are like big blockbustery ones that teenagers go to see in the movie theaters. And while at the same time he's doing these really interesting character studies on each of our main characters from the family that I think goes beyond something like that, and he really fleshes them out and has a lot of substance to it there. And the way that it all ties together with the past and the present, I think that's like a really strong point in this story.
So before we get that deep, I do want to, we're going to talk about each episode, and we're going to talk about all these changes, but just in case anyone clicked on this wondering, like they've read the book, they enjoyed the book, and they're like, should I check out this show? I haven't checked it out at all. I just want to briefly sort of set up the biggest change, and that might give you an insight into like what you're in for. And that is that the protagonists of this show are the Crane family. And the Crane family is not the same as it is in the book. It's kind of a reimagining of our, Eleanor and Theodora, puts them in the same family with Luke, adds in a few others. There's a character named Shirley, which I'm sure is a reference to Shirley Jackson, and a character named Steve, who's sort of an author. And then they have their parents, and they lived in Hill House when they were kids. And we have two main timelines, them as adults and them as children, and it kind of bounces back and forth between those two timelines, and we learn about what happened to them as kids, because a bunch of wild stuff went down when they were in Hill House, and then now they're feeling the effects as adults, and we're building towards things in adulthood, and that's a big difference, right? So that doesn't sound like the book to me that people know and love. In that way, it feels almost like this is more of an homage to that, or like a tribute to it in a way, but not really trying to be an adaptation of it, even though it technically is. It operates in an interesting way when it comes to adaptations. We haven't covered many like this, but every now and then we do encounter one where it's like, yeah, it's roughly based off of this thing, but we're really going to do something different.
Yeah. It's very interesting too, because it was, it's kind of done in a way where you see what he's doing, and it feels like I'm okay with it as somebody who read the source material. I'm like, okay, like we're not getting the scientific, like not Ghostbusters, but like ghost hunting sort of story we were getting in Shirley Jackson's story, where they were there to see what was going on. And it seems like you could also like extrapolate this out and say, like, if the characters weren't all named the same things as they were in Shirley Jackson's novel, maybe what happens to this whole family is what someone may someday come to study, because there's like spooky stuff in the house and they want to see if it's real. You know what I mean? But it operates in a way that's like I think like the past timeline and the current timeline are like 1992 and 2018 or something like that. Yeah. So it doesn't really work in the way that it's like a prequel or a sequel, but there's a lot of like taking of names and blending of characters and changing of events, but it's all. Yeah, but it's
every now and then you see certain moments that are like, yeah, that's kind of like what happened in the book, but it's not.
Exactly. Yeah, and in that way, I think, like you said, I can see why someone would see something like this and say like, oh, Flanagan can sort of create his own version of like Kubrick and Stephen King's The Shining, and then blend it all up into Doctor Sleep with Stephen King's newer novel, because it did require something much different. You can't just adapt directly either one of them because of the history of both of those property, like the film and the book of The Shining. Well, like it took something completely different.
We I don't want to get too much into Doctor Sleep because that's like a whole nother topic, but we did record episodes about it, and we're both on record that we have mixed feelings about the adaptation, and some of my concerns with that adaptation were popping up in this, mostly to a lesser extent. I think because there wasn't this strange sequel to this iconic film thing happening. But yeah, I don't want to relitigate that. So I do, if people want to hear us talk about Dr. Sleep, definitely check out that episode. But for fans of Shirley Jackson, again, just talking to people who maybe haven't watched the show, I think there is something here for you that is enjoyable. If you like this kind of horror. But I do think that the kind of horror that the show is not necessarily the same kind of horror that the book is.
Right. I agree.
I think the show tends to lean into bigger, flashier scares and tenser moments, and bigger payoffs. And the book is all about creeping dread. It's all about the thing unseen. It's all about the implication of something scary. It's in that way, the vibe of the horror is just slightly different. It's like slightly different enough to where if you're a big fan of this book, you might be frustrated to see this kind of adaptation.
I want to say one thing really quickly too, though, just for the listener, is that Luke has only seen half the show. So he's seen 5 episodes, and like we haven't really been at the house all that much.
That's true. I have only seen 5 episodes. This is my initial impressions from half the show. But I mean, like, I think if it really bothered people in the way that I imagine some people might be bothered by it, they probably won't even make it. Right. As far as I did.
Yeah.
Because it's present there at the beginning. You might start watching it and go, this is not at all what Shirley Jackson's novel is.
This comes down to the adaptation thing, right? Like if you're looking for a direct adaptation, this isn't it. If you're looking for something that might sort of appeal to the same sort of stories, it's got a lot going for it that I think is much, much different, and it takes a lot of liberty, so you have to be okay with that. But there is a spirit of the story that's still there, but like you said, Luke, it's not as much the like classic horror where it's kind of like slow moving and some of it's more subtle. The Shirley Jackson's is more subtle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I say all of that with the caveat of like I'm of two minds about the show, because part of me, because I loved the book so much and it was my first real experience with, I mean, I guess I've seen the 90s adaptation, but I don't remember it. So my first real experience with this is this book, and I love it so much. There's a little bit of frustration with how much it's being changed and how the horror feels kind of different. And but once I kind of got past that and I was able to like appreciate the show for what it is and what it's trying to do, that it is sort of an homage, and it seems like it's trying to honor what Shirley Jackson meant and the power of this story while doing something different with it. I came around, and like I definitely am having a good time. And I think he does do great work with characters, which we'll get into, and we'll talk about why ultimately I'm coming around on the idea of like having the Crane family all be there related and all that stuff. Like ultimately that change is paying big dividends as we go further into a story. And I'm realizing, well, he had to fill 10 episodes of television. This gives him lots of interpersonal drama he can mine here. But one thing I do want to acknowledge too is, and it's hard for me to like put my finger on it, and it's hard for me to articulate it in a way that will probably be satisfying to people. Shirley Jackson's book feels like it's written by a woman in a good way. It feels like she understands Eleanor intimately, and it feels like a struggle of a woman who feels trapped in her life. And Mike Flanagan's show doesn't feel that way to me. And I'm not saying there aren't women who worked on the show. I'm sure there are. But some of the characters who we spend a lot of time with are men. Steve has been sort of invented for the show. Luke was in the book, but he's very different in the show. We spent a lot of time with them. And in that sense, like it just feels like less of a woman's story in the way that Hunting of Hill House very much is one. And I can see that frustrating people too, if you're coming into it and you're like, what's going on here? And I would have liked to see an adaptation run like with a woman director who maybe has a really intimate connection with that part of the story. Now, all that being said, I'm a man, so who am I to really judge it? It's just something that I picked up on a little bit.
Yeah, to agree with you, when I was watching it, I distinctly felt that as well. Like I felt like there were certain times where I was like, I think it would have been done differently if it was, showrun or directed by a woman at that point. And it's not anything.
It's hard to put your finger on, right? Like what it is exactly.
It's not anything outwardly like offensive that he's doing or anything. It just feels like a different touch would have been there.
Yeah, it's just the perspective, right? The perspective, it just can't quite be faked, right? There is something authentic to that, and it's a tricky subject, and as a male writer who writes from women's POVs sometimes in my stories, like I am sensitive to that, difficulty. And it's something that if you're going to write from someone's point of view outside your own, you have to be cognizant of. But the fact of the matter is you're just never going to be able to nail certain things in the way that someone who has that lived experience will. And that's okay. It's not to say you can't tell a good story. But I just wanted to give voice to the idea that like there could be people who watch this and feel like Mike Flanagan just doesn't get it in the way that they wish he did. And I'm sympathetic to that. But all that being said, what he's able to accomplish here, I think, is good and it's interesting in its own right. There is some cool sort of acknowledgments of it. It is at times a little heavy-handed. It is at times a little bit unsubtle. And I had a little bit of frustration with that. And that reminded me of some of the stuff with Dr. Sleep, where it's a little bit on the nose, a little bit too directly going at things instead of coming at it from the sides. And we can get into more specifics as we move through the episodes, but I guess that's I have sort of a mixed feeling about the show. I am enjoying it. I definitely am looking forward to finishing it, and maybe he'll, land everything in a way that will make me happy. But right now it's like, I'm having to figure out how to watch the show so that I don't get frustrated with some of the dramatic changes from the book.
Yeah. So I can totally understand where you're coming from with most of that stuff. Like the ways that it's changed, if you're like going in and you're like, I want Shirley Jackson's work completely adapted, you're probably going to be disappointed. One thing I do think is like people who are coming to this story, I think may even have coming to the story without having read the book are coming to it with more open arms. Like you're gonna allow this story to take you on. And I think in that case specifically,
absolutely,
people are going to respond to the show in a really positive way, because I do think it's one of the better horror shows that like you're going to see right now.
Yeah.
And I don't watch all the stuff that's out there, so, don't quote me on that necessarily, but this is the type of horror show that I'm like, this is so much fun to watch. And it's like you said, if you're looking for like a prestige drama horror, like gothic, that's not this. It's not like Guillermo del Toro's like, Crimson Peak, something like that. It's like strong Shirley Jackson vibes. That's not in this movie.
I haven't seen that. But...
it's very like gothic, very like lots of shadowy figures, and just the use of color and stuff in that movie. That movie's amazing. But I also I enjoy this story because I think I saw this first, and like I said in our book coverage, I was able to like reverse engineer, because that's why it was so fresh to me. Shirley Jackson's story was so fresh to me because it's completely different, and Shirley Jackson's story, while being, I think, if you're hearing that, by the way, there's a lot of thunder going on my end right now. So it's
got that atmospheric thunder going on.
Yeah. So Shirley Jackson's story, while being much more like eloquent and, like you said, subtle, it does feel like the setup of an older story, if that makes sense. Like it feels like, okay, we're going to get some characters together and there's a science experiment going on and we're going to see how it goes. And it goes to interesting places. And like I said, I love that book. This feels like something that's like, of course, a show has to be, it's got to be extended by a lot. And there's a lot of moving parts and like timeline stuff going on. Like we've talked about different timelines and the way that threads together. So like Luke said, if you're looking for the direct adaptation, if you're that person, you're probably going to be let down. If you're open enough to like sort of go into a new experience and compare the two, I think there's a lot here. And I think there's a lot that I've been enjoying even on a second viewing. And I'd like to talk about some of the reasons why. Do you want to jump into Mike Flanagan and then we can get into some specifics with the episodes?
Yeah, okay. Definitely. Because I do feel like I need to defend some of the statements I've made so far. But I'm going to save that for when we're into specifics.
Yeah. So Mike Flanagan, we have talked about him before, but I'm just going to give a short bio again, is an American filmmaker and partner with Intrepid Pictures. He is best known for his horror films, all of which he directed, wrote, and edited, including Absentia, Oculus, Hush, Before I Wake, Ouija, Origin of Evil, Gerald's Game, and Dr. Sleep. Flanagan also created, directed, produced, wrote, and edited the Netflix supernatural horror series The Haunting of Hill House, based on Shirley Jackson's novel of the same name. He has also spearheaded the standalone second season titled The Haunting of Bly Manor, based on the horror novella The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. He is the showrunner of the upcoming Netflix horror series Midnight Mass and The Midnight Club. Flanagan's work has attracted the praise of critics for his directing, focus on characters and themes rarely depicted in horror, and Stephen King, Quentin Tarantino, and William Friedkin, among others, have praised him. He's married to actress Kate Siegel, who has been featured in most of his work since Oculus. They also wrote the screenplay of Hush together. In this story,
Siegel's Theodora, right?
yeah, Siegel is Theodora. And so that, that's an interesting element too, when thinking about like the performance and the director and like the performance that the director is able to get because of that intimate relationship. It's always something interesting to note. So Flanagan's early career, his student films were more oriented towards melodrama. He later characterized them as unfit for public consumption, but said they were incredible learning experiences, which I think is the case for most student films. His first film, directed after graduation, Ghosts of Hamilton Street in 2003, was filmed in Maryland and featured local actors. Flanagan originally intended for the Oculus story to be told in a series of short films, but he could not find the financing. Instead, he shot the chapter that included a backstory and used that to demonstrate that he could direct a horror film. The short proved popular at film festivals, and producers were interested in developing the concept. However, they either wanted to shoot it as a found footage film or rejected Flanagan's stipulation that he direct the feature-length adaptation. Flanagan then directed Absentia in 2011, which was financed through a Kickstarter campaign in response to this rejection. Made for $70,000 and filmed in his Glendale, California apartment, Absentia was released direct to video but gained popularity when Netflix offered it on their streaming service. After the surprise success of Absentia, Flanagan returned to Oculus, which he again shopped around. Intrepid Pictures took an interest in the concept and agreed to let Flanagan direct. The feature version of Oculus was filmed in 2012 and was released theatrically by Relativity Media in 2014. And then that sort of started him on this rocket ship that we've talked about, where he went on to just create tons of horror and Stephen King adaptations. And
I think Stephen King is a good match for him, honestly, with his style, because a lot of King's stories are sort of big swing horror concepts that, unlike Shirley Jackson, are this kind of horror. And I think especially when it's put on screen, if you're looking for a more faithful version of things, like we kind of got with Dr. Sleep, although there were some changes, I don't know. I think this style lends itself to King, so I see why those two pair together pretty well.
They really do. And Stephen King is a fan of his work as well.
And I can see that
stated basically at this point that he said that. I do think that that's part of what we're picking up on with the differences between Shirley Jackson's story and this one, right? Is like he kind of excels at really deep dives on character. With Shirley Jackson's story, it seemed like that story was like some of the characters were more archetypal, but our main two characters had a lot of depth to them and were interesting and different than and I may have even mentioned that in the book episode, that like they feel at first like they're archetypes and then eventually like develop into something more. And I think that these characters that are introduced in this version of Hill House, this series version, feels like you said like how grimy and gray the characters are in like a Stephen King story. Like they're you kind of hate, like I don't know about you, but through 5 episodes, Stephen, the brother Stephen, kind of sucks. Like
he's like the worst. I do have to also point out, like so Luke is my name, obviously, and then there's an older brother named Steven, which my older brother's name is Steven, so it's a little weird how many ties. I was like expecting one of the sisters to be Caitlin, like a little weird.
I mean, I definitely thought about that as well, because how could you not? They definitely tapped into some of your story, I think, for the Crane family here.
I mean, the similarities basically end at the name, but it's pretty funny.
We'll get more into these characters, but Steven's a writer as well. So, and like, of course, anytime there's a writer in a story, there's a lot being said by the creators, I think.
Yeah, it's weird too, because he has written a book called The Haunting of Hill House, which he then reads from at the beginning, the opening of the first episode. He reads the opening of the book, which I didn't realize, like last week when I read the opening paragraph of the book. It's a little different though. There's like a small change in some of the lines, which, like, if you're going to read it verbatim, like, why not just read it verbatim? I don't know. But it felt a little weird to me to have this male author stand-in be reading from his book and have it be the exact words. Like, I know it's a way to get the words in the episode, which clearly he wanted to do, because he must love that opening as much as I do. But I don't know. It felt a little odd to have this guy be the author of this.
It's a famous like queen of horror, basically like her work co-opted by some fictional male character, right? It feels weird in and of itself. I think I don't know. We'll talk more about it into these episodes. Do you want to jump into those now?
Yeah, I think I'm ready, man. You can tell I'm chomping at the bit a little bit. But yeah, that's cool. I mean, Flanagan definitely seems like he's, got this niche carved out in horror, and it's working for him,
Humble beginnings, right? He's turned down. Yeah. He's doing student films that then turn into short films, and he wanted to do multiple chapters, and he's not going the traditional route. And then he gets a Kickstarter going to get his first film made, and then it does well enough on Netflix that he gets a chance to make Oculus, like the actual feature-length film. Like, yeah, that's he's out there doing everything he can to make his mark, and I think that it's paying off in major ways when you direct the sequel to Stanley Kubrick and the adaptation of Stephen King's Dr. Sleep, sequel to Kubrick's The Shining. I don't know. That honestly, it's still hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that like he adapted that. And like there were things that when you mentioned earlier we were mixed on it. We're mixed in the way that like at least I am. I'm definitely mixed because the highs were really high in that movie, but then there were some things that just did not work really, and it didn't come together as like a fully formed story as much as the book felt like it did.
Yeah. My ultimate, I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to point people towards that episode. I don't want to rehash it here because I'm going off of memory of something I saw over a year ago. So yeah, listen to that.
All right, so episode 1 is called Stephen Sees a Ghost. Stephen is an author known for The Haunting of Hill House, an autobiographical novel about his childhood experience while residing in the haunted mansion with parents Hugh and Olivia and younger siblings Shirley, Theo, Nell, and Luke. During their stay, the Cranes encounter paranormal occurrences and are forced to flee without Olivia, who dies within the house, traumatizing the rest of the family. Years later, Stephen used his family's traumatic experiences to write his book, straining the bonds with his siblings. Although it became a bestseller, he missed most of the frightening experiences and does not actually believe in the paranormal. Stephen and Shirley miss calls from Nell, who then calls Hugh and expresses concern for Luke, who has become a drug addict. When Stephen returns home, he finds Nell standing there. He receives a call from Hugh informing him that Nell went to Hill House and is dead. Stephen realizes that Nell is a ghost.
So I was shocked.
The first episode.
Eleanor dies in the first episode. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I feel better about it with what we get to later. I guess we're in full spoilers for the first 5 episodes at this point, right? Like,
I think we need to be, yeah.
Okay, so I will, yeah. So like in the 5th episode, it's very focused on Eleanor, and we get more of what happened with her. And that helped me a little bit, but I was frustrated to see Eleanor die, and I was like, well, are they going to make someone else basically into Eleanor? Like, it's her story, and they've killed her, and they've seemed to have replaced her with, this guy. You know what I mean? It's like you can see some of my frustrations there.
It's also a great, like, sort of loss because Victoria Pedretti, was, I think, really likable, right away. Youngest sibling, the baby of the family, and some of the stuff that goes on. We attach to this character, and we know from reading the book that this is the kind of the main character, and we're learning about, at least kind of a little bit in this first episode, that like some of these kids have like specific almost powers, kind of sensitivities, yeah. Which is something that's kind of set up with Shirley Jackson's story we talked about last week. The possibility of like people being sensitive to the house. We just, with this first episode, a couple of things I wanted to note. I think that this story, this version of this story really goes there. I think that, like killing a character early on like this, and not even just that, but like there's a lot of stuff where like if you're not comfortable seeing like autopsies and like just things that are hard to look at and just death.
Well, I think the autopsy happens next episode, right?
Later, yeah. I'm just like, more general
early
right now,
on
like,
in the show. Yeah,
it's like it kind of could be a tough thing to. If you're not like a horror fan necessarily, or if you don't like that stuff in your stories, there's a lot of death talked about. A lot of like heavy stuff goes on in the story, and that's a tough thing to sort of have in a lighter story like this. And I think that that's part of it, is like it's not really a light story at that point. There's a lot of like,
yeah, I was gonna say I wouldn't call this light. I'd call this very heavy, but and it is like it feels oppressive. Flanagan seems to really like a certain, I think it's color correcting. Is that, correct me if I'm wrong?
Yeah, or just color. There's filters and you can use in cameras as well.
Yeah, so like every scene viewed through some sort of filter. It's kind of bluish, kind of It tends to be cold. Has a cold feel to it, and that lends a certain oppressiveness to it. And I remember that look was in Doctor Sleep too, so it seems to be just like how he likes things to look, and that's cool. Like I know what's his name from David Fincher. He kind of has a certain look to all of his films too. You know, is a certain feel to the camera. And here, you know, it lends to that oppressiveness. And in that same way, like, things are going wrong left and right. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong, it feels like. But yeah, I do want to touch a little bit on this, what you were talking about, like we see the bent neck lady right at the start. She kind of comes swooping in a little bit. We don't get a great look at her, and then we see the dark figure over Nell at one point. We see, I think we see Nell dancing in the house. We see like a flash of her dancing and like through the house, and she's wearing this gown, and you know it's all old and covered in vines and cobwebs. So there's a lot of these, like, I don't know, just very Halloween, like big scares, big, you know, you're seeing, you know, someone opens their mouth and screams and their eyes turn white and you see all these veins, and it's like it's very it's, I don't know, like it's unsubtle, right? It's just like, yeah, here's your big scare. Theatrical, yeah. And that's cool. Like I get that. And I think this show came out around Halloween, the year it came out, I want to say. I remember it was a lot of people were watching it in October or something like that, and really enjoying it for the Halloween season. And I think that's like perfect for this because it does have that vibe. And we talked about with like Sleepy Hollow, there's a certain aesthetic to that was very Halloween.
But those things that you're saying, which is why I kind of mentioned, like, those are normally associated with a light story. And then this has got some heavy topics and some heavier things going on within the context of the story. So that's why I mentioned, like, it feels like something that's like a lighter sort of story. And then it has like much heavier topics that kind of weigh on you, honestly.
Right, yeah, especially when we get into, like, I think next episode, but it starts getting really heavy with the topics. But like the mother commits suicide, we hear, you know, there's a lot of death, and then we see Nell die at the end of the episode, and she's, you know, appears as this ghost. And one thing that helped me connect with this story as I progressed through was starting to view it in the same way that I viewed Dr. Sleep. And that is almost more of a dark fantasy, at least at times, because there is almost like, okay, there's a spirit realm. Okay, there's, you know, ghosts are a thing and they behave in this way. And, you know, people have sensitivities, and those sensitivities almost give them a magical connection to the supernatural. Yeah. And like once I started sort of buying into that like dark fantasy element of it, it doesn't make it scarier, but it gives me something to be interested in the show. And in that sense, like, I'm kind of rooting for this family, and I'm interested in Theodora, who seems to have these, you know, almost powers when it comes to this stuff, and, you know, the sensitivities of these different kids. And this feels to me like, I don't want to theorize because you know the answers, and I can see your face right now. So I do want you to theorize at some point. I want to hear some thoughts on where you think it's going. Okay. Well, just right now, like, this feels like a confrontation between the family and the house is going to happen, is the sense I'm getting. And it feels to me like he's laying the groundwork for some sort of way in which the family can actually best Hill House and defeat Hill House. And if that, I don't give me any indication. I won't even look at you. But if that ends up happening, I'm going to be frustrated, because to me, Hill House doesn't feel like an entity that should be able to be defeated. Now, maybe they'll try to and fail. That's definitely a possibility too. But I almost don't even like that angle, because in the book, like, Hill House is inescapable. It's inevitable. Once you're there, you're trapped. It's not something you can fight. All you can try and do is escape. So the idea that he might be laying the groundwork for some sort of big supernatural confrontation between people and house, I just don't know if I like that direction as a fan of the Shirley Jackson novel. For the show, which has got a little bit more of that dark fantasy element, it's longer, it's more episodes, maybe you feel like you need to, like, deliver in a certain way in an arc that's going to be more satisfying to a viewer. I can see it going that way. I'm not saying I'll hate it, and maybe I'll end up loving it, or at least enjoying it for what it is. But it feels a little bit odd, and all of that's just theorizing. And I'm not looking at James, so I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, we got to move on.
we talked about some of the characters, but it seems like as these episodes go on, all of these characters have some sort of interesting angle, and I thought that was another strong decision that was made, was each of these first 5 episodes at least really focus in on each of the children within the story. The first episode being about Steven, the second episode being about Shirley, the third episode being about Theo, and then Luke, and then Nell. And I thought that was really fun because, like you mentioned, Luke, one thing you mentioned from the book was that we get a little bit of time with each of the characters before we go to Hill House, and we get to see them in their own environments and stuff. And I felt like that was sort of a way of doing that same kind of thing while setting up these characters. And I think, other than Steven, I think each of them has like an interesting angle for what's going on with dealing with their traumas, because ultimately that's kind of what the angle of this show takes, is like,
well, even Steven does too, because he's in denial.
Right, he definitely is, but what I mean is that he, like, his connection to the paranormal is like not as existent right now, because he's kind of not, he like doesn't like believe in it or something, like he's like almost removed from it.
He actually is more similar to Luke in the book than the Luke that we get in the show, because Luke in the book also didn't really have much of a connection to the supernatural. He didn't experience a lot of the stuff, not nothing, but not just a lot of the stuff he didn't experience. In that way, Steven in the show reminds me of that.
Yeah, so I guess to dig into the episode itself a little bit more, what did you think about Steven going to this house and visiting with this grieving, this widow, and like sort of her story and the ghost, that whole angle to the episode?
I like it okay. I like that he's sort of going to be sort of the rational one. He kind of is taking on the role of Dr. Montague a little bit. And I know we are introduced to Dr. Montague in the 5th episode. At least so far, feels like a shadow of the character in the book. It seems to me that Steven is taking on more of that role of being the sort of clear-headed, rational type, who is like studied paranormal stuff clearly through his writing of these novels and has opinions. And him showing up at the house and like setting up this test, and he's got the science equipment, right? Like the heat sensors, and he's going to record himself. That feels very much like Dr. Montague, even though we didn't get those specific details. Seems like the kind of thing he would do. And then he finds an explanation. The car horn. He finds the leak in the ceiling. I do like that later on, when we get to Nell's episode, the night terrors. It's a real world phenomenon. So I love it when you're taking supernatural phenomena and tying it to real world phenomena. That's something that Stephen King does very, very well, and a lot of horror writers do. And I like it when you start to do that here. I don't think anyone who's watching this show is ever fooled into wondering. Like, I don't think anyone's watching the show like, I wonder if anything supernatural is actually happening. No, like, it is. Like, I think the show is like clearly pressing its thumb on that side of like, yes, supernatural shit's happening, but there's just enough people who are willing to convince themselves it's not. It's not playing a game of like, is it or isn't it? We'll leave it up to you, the viewer, to decide. It's not interested in playing that game, in my opinion.
I think another strong decision that I've really enjoyed, especially rewatching, is the introduction of like their mother, the role that she plays within this house that they've bought, that they're trying to flip, and that's the whole premise of the past, at least, story of the family.
Yeah, Olivia Crane is the character. Yeah,
Olivia Crane, and the way that, of course, like nurture is going to shape a person. And like, trauma, these things do shape people. But it's interesting how closely in this story, like anything that goes on with the mother, has huge implications for the characters, like going forward.
And a very direct line, like she says something, and then you see that exact thing in the future. Like again, like it's both like I think it's a strength in the sense that it's broadly accessible. And I do think it's a bit of a weakness in the sense that it's not very subtle. It's very direct, on the nose.
But one of the things that I do think that it does well is set up the whole mystery of the story of like what happened. You know what I mean? Yeah. What happened that night, and where are we going with that?
Yeah, we still don't know at this point, at least. Yeah,
exactly. And how each child dealt with that, or what they saw, what they think they saw in the house at that time period. So that was another thing I wanted to shout out. Episode 2 is called Open Casket. In childhood flashbacks at Hill House, Shirley encounters a box of abandoned kittens and takes them in. However, the kittens all end up dying, which deeply affects Shirley, who obsesses over why she couldn't fix them. Later, during Olivia's funeral, an initially distraught Shirley is in awe that the mortician was able to fix her mother, to return her previous beauty. As an adult, Shirley is a mortician who owns a funeral business alongside her husband Kevin and rents a guest house to Theo, who is now a child therapist. Shirley is informed of Nell's death. Distraught, she decides to embalm and fix her sister herself. However, while doing so, she encounters her mother's ghost.
Fucking horrifying. That part,
really,
man.
really not okay.
The idea of embalming your own sibling.
Yeah.
Lots of characters try and talk her out of it, but she insists on doing it. I do like this is where I was starting to go like, okay, I do like this character, this deep dive into character that we're gonna get here, and I like the idea of like each episode focusing more on one of the siblings. This is Shirley's episode, which is interesting that clearly her name is a reference to Shirley Jackson. So I like that. And I also noticed, I don't know if you saw in this episode, Theo at one point as a kid is reading The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. So, seeding in some cool references.
Something that I didn't see the first time, but now that, I was kind of on the lookout and then saw it, I was like, holy shit, The Lottery. We just talked about that.
Yep.
So this is what I was talking about with earlier in the episode when I said that this show is like going for it and makes big swings. I'm not talking about the horror aspects necessarily. I'm talking about the sister wanting to embalm her own sibling.
Yeah, I would say in every way it takes big swings. Yeah, it's just going for it.
Yeah, and then a later episode we're getting like some stuff that goes on with like child like pedophiles and like child abuse and some and like this show goes to some crazy places and deals with some really heavy topics and honestly in some really fascinating ways. And like as much as it was like tough for me to watch Shirley like to perform like a embalming on her sister, it was also like, holy shit, like where is this character going? Like what is this character capable of? Why, a lot of things are running through my head while seeing someone do something like that, and just how in control she has to be.
Yeah, God, what a dark backstory here, because the whole thing with the finding of the 5 kittens, these little, babies, and then, there's even like a Game of Thrones moment where I think they say like, oh, there's 5 kittens for the 5 of us, and I'm like, oh god. And then they all die in horrific ways.
They all turn into dire cats that they sort of have as companions forever.
I was like, oh no. And then and then we get this flashback to seeing the mother's open casket, and then she's talking to the mortician at the end and finds out that he's the one who fixed her. And we get the implication that, that's why she does the thing that she does now.
I actually found out that that's Mike Flanagan's brother that played the mortician. Yeah.
Nice.
So just a little Easter egg.
How about that? And I do ultimately like that, it is very direct. Like, this is the thing that happened, and now I do this exact thing is what my living. But that's fine. I think here it works well, and it's a dark enough, weird enough thing to do that it does need an explanation. Like, we want to know why. Yeah. So it begs the question.
Did you really find yourself just being like, man, that is a job that I would never do? Because
I could never do it.
Never ever could I do it. Mm-mm. And it's also a weird ritualistic thing that we've done forever. And some people,
super weird, man. The whole embalming process.
It's such a weird thing.
Very bizarre.
It's so bizarre.
Very bizarre. Yeah, but and troubling. But yeah, I mean, there's also like the moment with the kitten has a bug in its mouth, the dead kitten, and then there's a bug, and then there's these eyes that are white, and these are big horror moments, right? You know what I mean? Like it is a lot, and it's scary. I mean, it's the kind of visuals that are gonna stick with you, and then that's mirrored in the present where we see the bug come out of Nell's mouth while she's on the table. And then, we kept expecting Nell to set up or something at some point. I'm glad that he didn't actually go there, because that would have been way too obvious, I think. We did get the bug scare, but then it's more the mother is on the next, rack over, I guess. And she's the one who sits up. So a little bit of a surprise there, I guess.
I am going to want to hear sort of what you think went on that night and what you think is ultimately going to happen. I know you said a little bit of it, but think about this stuff as we're going through these last 3 episodes, and then let me know at the end. But this episode 3 is called Touch. Theo is able to perceive feelings from people and impressions from objects when she touches them with bare hands. Child Luke encounters a ghost that attacks him and is upset that no one believes him. Theo investigates for him and finds a hidden door leading to the basement. Olivia reveals to her that her grandmother was sensitive just like her and gives Theo a pair of gloves to protect her hands. At her job, Theo comes across a child that she can't read, who claims to be tormented by Mr. Smiley, a monster. Theo goes to the girl's house and discovers the truth through her touch. The girl's foster dad was molesting her, and Mr. Smiley was a manifestation of the abuse. Theo gets the foster dad arrested. She goes to the morgue and touches Nell's forehead before collapsing and screaming. A flashback to their last night in Hill House reveals that when Hugh grabbed Theo as they were trying to flee, Theo saw disturbing images of ghosts and Olivia being pushed.
Yeah, this episode is a weird one. I do love a lot about it, but there are also things I didn't like about it. Mm-hmm. And this is where I really had to sort of change the way I was viewing the show a little bit to go like, okay, we're leaning into sort of a dark fantasy vibe here because Theo is magical in this show. Yep. And it's not subtle about it. She has these gloves that she very deliberately takes off and places her hands on thing and then is immediately struck with visions, whatever it is she's touching. She knows things she shouldn't be able to know, and this is happening both in the present and in the past.
It feels like eerily like a shine, right? Like something that
but
powerful.
Even less subtle than The Shining, right? Like it's very direct. Like my hands are gloved and I'm going to take them off and touch things, and then I'm going to, but it is similar.
I mean, like the shine, you can like communicate with people who also have the shine. Like there's like direct abilities that the shine gives you and stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah, she can read anybody and anything apparently. She can just touch like an area and feel it's like history and stuff.
It's pretty powerful. I'm not gonna lie.
Very, yeah. I gotta say at the beginning of the episode, someone like wraps her arm around her in bed and she like clutches the hand and then she turns around and no one's there and then she says out loud, "Whose hand was I holding?" And I was like, okay, like this is clearly a reference to what happens in the book, but it's a situation where it's almost overdone. Like,
right.
You wouldn't say that like out loud to an empty room. Mm-hmm. You would just think that, and it's implied that she is already struggling with this fear. But to say it out loud, again, it's like I just wish I could like tone it, like in certain moments, tone it back a little bit.
There's something to be said, and I end up doing this a lot, giving the benefit of the doubt, but there's something to be said for the fact that like there are people that aren't going to be that perceptive, that aren't going to pick up on these things, and I think some filmmakers and some studios will push for things like that, where it's like,
yeah. But in this situation, I mean, you feel someone's hand, you're holding it, you turn around, there's no one there, you freak out and sit up in your bed.
You can just have that.
Do you need to say out loud?
Exactly.
Whose hand was I holding?
I agree. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So just little moments like that every now and then. But you know, this child that she's dealing with, who builds walls around her, and she's just this brick wall who keeps everybody out to protect her. Like it's so directly a mirror, right? Like she's looking at herself as a kid. Also, how'd you feel about that moment where she wakes up in the middle of the night and she looks down at the foot of her bed and there's a giant, scary, smiley monster with a loud noise that looks at her? That's not a jump scare, right?
There's a lot of that stuff happening in this show for sure.
I mean, it's a fine moment. I just don't like the idea that it's not a jump scare. Like, let's just admit that that's what that is.
And I don't think Mike Flanagan's the guy who's going around saying, like, I don't do jump scares. I think other people may have been putting that on him at some points or another,
That's fair. So I shouldn't hold it against him. Yeah, because he's not the one making those claims.
The Mr. Smiley thing, that stuff that's why I mentioned, like, early 2000s sort of, like, blockbustery horror films. I think there's a place for both in this, obviously. But, like, that moment is, like, a sheer, like, all right, how long has it been since our last scare? All right, plug this in real quick.
Yeah.
And it does feel like it. And the show does that a lot. Like I said, like, the car is almost colliding when Steve is, like, doing the investigation in the first episode. Like, these jump scares that go to, like, a nightclub and it's just, like, loud out of nowhere. And you're like, whoa, Jesus, we were just in a bedroom in the middle of the night. Like, those jump scares are, I don't know, unnecessary, but it does keep, like, you on your toes, I guess, keeps you on edge.
Well, and with Theo in particular, I think this is the character that I feel, I don't know, is sort of rounded out in the least effective way. Like, there's something about her powers and her, especially as a child, she has sort of a flat affect as she walks around, and when she's talking to the adult characters, Like she's trying to be mysterious because she knows things. And it feels a little bit like they didn't know how to write the character in a way that felt human, because it's dealing with something that's very inhuman. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what my criticism amounts to, other than I like the deep character studies we get on a lot of the other siblings, but with Theo in particular, I just didn't feel as strongly connected to it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can understand also her struggling with like intimacy because of the touching thing. Like that's clearly something that's shown. I want to give a shout out to this episode too, just for the fact that, like, while I agree with some of the stuff that you're saying with the powers seeming kind of like really too powerful, I did think that the payoff of this episode was really interesting, and I thought that, like, it you know, going to a place of like her saving a child who was in a similar situation to her in certain ways, but then also dealing with the fact of like this child molester, and like going and using her powers to see something like that stuff was scary in general, like and the smiley face reveal of the ceiling was also just like a nice touch, because I didn't know where the smiley face thing was going to go when I first saw the show.
I agree. I actually really like that it wasn't an actual monster. It was a manifestation of this child's trauma, right? Has manifested as a monster, and that monster, through her power, is able to like physically manifest in Theo's bedroom. So it shows that there's like that's why she's haunted by this and tortured by this power. If that kind of shit's gonna happen. And
the thing that you were saying before, like the way that they felt like they didn't have a great grasp on like a young Theo and how like she would interact with the world, that the smiley face just out of the wood grain feels like something very real. Like it feels almost like something that actually did happen, because it would be like children like will change things in their mind to cope with things in that way. And like seeing something on the ceiling and seeing a smiley face out of it, like just horrible stuff. It's just and like it's effective, and it felt like something, like I said, that was real.
I do want to talk about the dumbwaiter scene for a minute. So the dumbwaiter scene is interesting because elevators are terrifying a little bit in general. I recently got stuck in one for about 45 minutes, which, it was fine. It wasn't as scary as it sounds. It wasn't that long in the scheme of things. But one of the scariest things about it is when an elevator starts malfunctioning. And then I start imagining it falling, is like the idea of being cut in half or being, crushed in some way. And so when I saw Luke in the dumbwaiter, she walks in and sees him, like I had a visceral reaction of just like recoiling, like get this kid the fuck out of there.
So the character Luke was in a little dumbwaiter, is what you're saying.
I was like, oh, get him out of there, get him out of there. And then she's like, oh yeah, I guess this is okay. She looks at the 200-pound thing as if that's going to be fine. And where it goes is scary. He ends up getting sent down to the basement, and he sees this like crawling zombie looking thing come at him, and then they end up pulling him back up just in time, although he gets his shirt ripped a little bit. That is spooky, but ultimately that's not the thing that terrifies me about elevators, and it's not the thing that terrified me about that situation. So it almost felt like a missed opportunity to do something that would have been even more visceral to me.
Yeah, the scariest part about it was when he was on his way down and he's screaming up and she's screaming down, not when he gets down to the bottom portion and he's stuck down there and something's crawling out, right? Like it's like as he's heading down to the unknown, will he get out? What's he going down to? Is he going to get hurt?
Or just the idea of like it getting stuck, or it falling, or him getting injured and breaking his arm, or getting some, like something getting trapped, like caught. Because that's the real danger, is you're going to get something caught. Like, there's all kinds of bad shit that can happen with that. I mean, dumbwaiters aren't much of a thing anymore because they were so dangerous. It was like one of the reasons why they stopped using them. For children specifically,
right? Like, because of kids would do that. Yeah. So there's a couple behind the scenes things that I wanted to talk about. So the overall vibe of this show is like something's lurking around every corner. Something's in the shadows. They actually did that, though. I don't know how much of that you've picked up on. They're like in wide shots of Hill House and other locations. They're like there's actual ghosts like in the backgrounds. I don't know if you like, they keep putting in.
I thought I've seen things before, but like I would like to like see the actual evidence of that, because I felt like stuff like that might have been happening. I do like the idea of that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's like apparently there was like 200. I mean, of course I haven't seen all of them and don't know where they all are, but from what I understand, there's like 200 like either visual effects or like complete CG effects of them putting ghosts in the background, like hands in places, like at one point there's like a little girl who like pokes her head out and pokes it back quickly and stuff, like just stuff like that in Hill House and in other areas, like to add to the ghosts that are throughout. So I thought that's something interesting to look for.
Well, I mean, some of them are pretty obvious. I assume you're talking about ones that are not obvious, like
they're not obvious.
Almost,
no,
they're
not like
hidden.
the direct.
Okay.
There might be a ghost that's like the bent neck or the guy with the bowler hat, something like that. Those are not what I'm talking about with the hands and stuff. Yeah, we're talking about like in the background. There's a bunch of Easter egg ghosts.
Okay.
It was creator-director Mike Flanagan's plan from the beginning to set up these kinds of little Easter eggs and see if people could spot them. While working on the primary prosthetic makeups for the show each day, the makeup team would also produce up to 4 of the hidden ghosts as well for Flanagan to pepper in the shadows.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll have to watch a breakdown on that or something and see which ones I recognize and which ones I don't. Yeah, I'll be on the lookout even more for them now. Yeah,
for more of them.
Sounds good.
And then also, you kind of talked about one of these, so I assume you kind of were picking up on it, but each child represents a different stage of grief.
I didn't realize that.
So Stephen representing denial, Shirley representing anger, Theo representing bargaining, Luke representing depression, and Nell representing acceptance.
Okay.
So I would also keep that in mind going forward and see what you think of that as like a theory. You know, it seems like something that I believe, so we'll see, because it does seem like each of these characters, you said Steve right away that he sort of represents denial, so you were picking up on at least one of those.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're definitely all coping in different ways, and if I had really start to define each way, I maybe would have come around to that stages of grief or whatever.
One of the only other things I would be so remiss if I didn't mention this, but the actor who played the father, who played young Hugh Crane, is Henry Thomas, who is the young boy from E.T. Why
does he turn into a different person when he gets older?
That's something I was gonna talk about too. So they had the younger Hugh Crane as Henry Thomas, which I think just the idea of having young Henry Thomas from E.T. is like, I haven't seen him in a ton of stuff, so I think that's great.
God, I didn't recognize him.
One of the main reasons I want to bring him up, though, is because the contacts that he's wearing God. Distracting.
So distracting. I wrote it. I was like, I am 100% convinced he's wearing contacts to make his eyes like a certain shade of blue, I guess, to line up with the later actor.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well, but I found this. He wore blue contacts throughout the entire season. The elder Hugh Crane has gray eyes. Hugh enters Hill House, a wide-eyed house flipper who never faced a problem he couldn't fix. As time passes, though, Thomas's bright blue eyes turn into Hutton's steely gray as the elder Crane has pulled himself away from his children and the events that haunt him to this day.
And so as he turns into a completely different man.
A different person, yeah. I don't understand the reason for the contacts. They were way more distracting than they needed to be.
Like, why don't you just have the same actor play him in both time? Just do, like, to color his hair. Like, that's all you really need to do. Like, I don't know. Weird, but okay. And I like both actors. I like both of them so far. I mean, we haven't seen a bunch out of Timothy Hutton, but what we have, I've liked. But it's weird because it seems like a different person whenever I see that. So
yeah, I mean, maybe that's intentional. That like they wanted you to feel that way because he kind of is a different person.
I'm sure they'd say it's intentional. But
exactly.
I like whatever the intention is. I'm not sure I like it.
So episode 4 is called The Twin Thing. Child Luke is frustrated as his family never believes him about the ghosts he sees, including his imaginary friend, Abigail. Luke claims a bowler hat his mother finds in the attic and wears it. Present Luke is now 90 days clean. Since birth, Luke and Nell are able to feel the other's physical ailments. Luke's best friend in rehab, Joey, flees to get high, and Luke follows to get her back. Child Luke encounters the ghost of an abnormally tall man that comes to get his bowler hat back from him. Luke finds Joey, but begins feeling unnaturally cold and stiff. Lacking money for a place to stay, Luke breaks into Steve's apartment to steal items to sell, but is caught by Steve, who gives him money. Joey steals the money and flees, and Luke is mugged, leaving him wandering with the hatted ghost following him. Luke calls his caseworker, and she and Steve find him and inform him that Nell committed suicide. Realizing he has been feeling Nell in death all this time, Luke states it wasn't suicide.
Yeah, this episode was perhaps my favorite.
Yeah, I think it's my favorite too.
Of these 5, it's very good.
Of these 5.
I do actually really like the following episode too, but I think Mike Flanagan, obviously with this episode and with what we saw go on in Doctor Sleep, he does a good job with addicts and sort of the monster of addiction and the struggle of that. Now, it's not something I've never gone to rehab. I've never like experienced it in that way, but it's just something that feels, if not 100% authentic, it feels powerful and it feels convincing. And I like the way he approaches it with empathy, and while showing how fucked up it is and how he's at the same time making us feel really sorry for Luke. But also he does a good job of showing all the ways in which Luke has let people down and, violated trust. And I don't know. I just like that handling of this very heavy subject matter. Maybe people have been through it would disagree. I don't know. I like the connection with this Joey character. I feel for Luke here, and I think he's a character that is, really struggling, and he turned to substance to try and wash away the fear and the pain and everything he has associated with his childhood, and that is something we see a lot of people who have PTSD and traumatic experiences do. So I think that's all really interesting. And then you pair that with this floating tall man with the cane that extends to the ground, and I'm like, that's just a cool idea. I liked it. Him clicking around, and his feet are hovering like flat, yet he's using the cane as he's like walking. Yeah. It's awesome. Super weird and off-putting, and I loved it. That was great. And then he keeps appearing in the background, like, but always facing away. And then at one point when Luke's walking and he's like hovering closer and closer and closer, that was pretty scary.
For sure. This episode works really well for me as well. I think that in showing how he's like coping eventually by using it endears us to him more, because it's like he is, again, in the same similar situation. Everything that happened in Hill House draws a straight line to like where he's at currently. And a lot of these, you think of this family, all of these characters in the family in a different scenario, not in Hill House, and thinking about like how their life goes. It's definitely probably very different. And I think that Luke as a character, it's not just that he's like an addict and then he is in the program. He's also trying to help someone else who's helped him before. And I think that whole section where and just the struggle and like the inevitability of the things that are happening to him with his friend who he's trying to help, and how like he is in some ways dealing with things that his family's had to deal with himself. I think that all of those are really strong things to hang for a character, like to have a great fleshed out character, and his motivation is very clear. And then one of the best things in my opinion is his like supernatural abilities to always know what's going on with Nell. And like he tells a story about her breaking his ankle, and then she feels it, and to an extreme degree. And then when he starts to get cold, did you know obviously that it was like the Nell stuff, or was it like...
Yeah, I figured it was the Nell stuff. I didn't make the connection to like she's dead now, and that's why he's feeling like stiff. And I should have maybe, when he said the word stiff, like I should have thoued of that more.
I remember that realization being like hitting me like a ton of bricks too, being it was a good like, reveal. Wow, the twin that he's so connected to, and like he feels like he's dying too, like just great reveal.
I agree. Good stuff.
I wanted to also mention the bowler hat man's costuming, because I did find some stuff about that.
Okay. I have to say that hat made me think of Rose the Hat. I know it's a slightly different kind of hat, but when I saw it, I don't know, I just immediately thought of Rose the Hat. Like it's kind of similar. I don't know.
Yeah, true. So apparently the actor would be outfitted with arm and leg extensions. The arm extensions were 2 feet long and would strap on underneath the actor's wardrobe. Hand grips were provided that allowed Steer, the actor, to move the hands back and forth. Magnets were used in the hands so that the bowler hat man could hold his cane. For the disturbing scene when the bowler hat man peers underneath a bed, an additional actor would perform the ghost's legs in the background. Finally, the floating gag would be achieved with wire rigs provided by the show's stunt team. So that's just cool. Like interesting to think about. Like I just love seeing certain shots and then knowing how they're actually
practically
created
done,
practically.
He's not just a big floating CGI dude. Yeah, which makes it way more convincing.
Yeah, it's really cool. It works nicely. But I think we should jump into this last episode. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the bent neck lady. Child Nell is tormented by an apparition she calls the bent neck lady, a ghost with a broken neck. Adult Nell sees a sleep technologist, Arthur, for sleep paralysis. The two fall in love and marry. Arthur tragically suffers a brain aneurysm and dies, and the bent neck lady returns. Nell begins to use her medication less and less. In her broken state, and convinced by her therapist that Hill House is just a carcass of a house and not the haunted nightmare of her past, Nell travels to the house. She sees it as it was in her childhood, fully renovated with her family and Arthur present. This, however, is an illusion. The house is desolate and abandoned in reality. Nell is led to the spiral staircase where she puts a noose around her neck, whilst imagining it to be her mother's locket. She is then pushed by her mother's ghost, breaking her neck. As Nell dies, she travels through the past, revealing that she herself was the bent neck lady and has been haunting her younger self all along. I got goosebumps just reading that part again.
Yeah,
because that last part.
That's the best reveal of the show so far.
Yeah,
great reveal. I think I had a moment because I kept thinking, is the bent neck lady her mom? Because I kept expecting her mom to be the one, because they said her mom committed suicide, and I'm like, did she hang herself? And she's bent neck because she that, and then I'm like, well, maybe it was the other previous Hill mom, because I'm like, it doesn't really make sense for her to be haunting her because she's still alive. But at one point I did think, like, could it be her? That would be weird. And then I immediately was like, that doesn't make any sense. So I kind of dismissed it. But
when I first saw this, I had no idea. And when the reveal happened,
cool.
And the way that she's like being dropped into scenes from her life, like that hit me so hard.
And it's instead from the point of view of the bent neck lady. The bent neck lady is her. And then also each time she drops her neck, like the way it moves and like bulges, is also really horrifying. And it's all made better. That reveal at the end is all made great by the fact that like this whole episode, going and meeting Arthur, falling in love with Arthur, their wedding, and getting to see the like a lot of perspectives from that. From Nell's point of view, it's heartbreaking. The aneurysm thing is terrifying. Like she's like sleep paralyzed, laying in bed. He gets up to turn the light on and just has an aneurysm, and like she's stuck, and like the bent neck lady shows up, and it's just like, oof, well, sleep paralysis, real thing, and people do really see like shadowy figures looming over them. So I think this is a very smart way to tie horror into like a real world phenomenon. Very effectively, and the whole relationship was very adorable, and then it ends tragically because this is a horror show. Right. With him having a brain aneurysm, which is terrifying. All very effectively done. Eleanor is sort of spinning out of control. She throws all of her medication away. It seems somehow tied to her interaction with Luke, like she sees him. Like she helps him buy heroin. Again, this is another example I was saying where like they make us feel sorry for Luke, but then we see him in this moment where it's pretty despicable. And she buys him the heroin, and then I think the next scene is her throwing all of her medication in the toilet. So the implication is that she's like, I'm not going to be on anything, which we definitely see as bad. And then Dr. Montague is introduced. I have a feeling that this is almost more of an homage than anything else. This doesn't feel like the same character at all. I'll be curious to see if he does more later, but and he gives her the idea to go back to the house, which of course is a terrible idea, and we know that, but she decides to do it and has convinced herself, oh, it's just a corpse out in the woods, and it's okay if I go at night, no big deal, and alone. But she's off her meds, so she does it. We do get the Cup of Stars, which is another reference to the book. There's a moment where Mrs. Dudley says a line to her out of the book about how like don't let them take it away from you, and it just felt weird again. Like Mrs. Dudley from the book is a very specific kind of person, and in the show she seems a little different, but kind of like trying to be kind of the same. And so to have her deliver this line to Eleanor, it just felt wrong. Like I don't know, again, this is like another moment where it was like they wanted to get that line in there. Someone liked it a lot in the book, Mike Flanagan probably liked the line in the book, and he's like, I gotta get it in here. But it's weird to have another character say it to Eleanor instead of Eleanor say it to someone else, which is, I think, the way it's properly done.
I think that they definitely are setting up her to be different than the Dudley, just because she's not quite as it doesn't feel as if she's almost like antagonistic in the other book, or in Shirley Jackson's story. It seems like she's like, I'm out of here. Nothing matters. I take care of my job and I get out of here.
Well, we said she's kind of almost comedy at a certain point, because she has these like lines she says over and over again.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see where it goes going forward. But you can see now, at least through 5 episodes, where when I'm reading the book, these things that like stood out to me when I remembered this Cup of Stars, like I remembered that being a specific thing that's talked about in the show here, and then when it's brought up in Shirley Jackson's book, I'm like, oh, okay, like that's a fun little reference, and it feels like there's a lot of that going on too.
I'm glad it works. I'm glad it works sort of retroactively in that way for you, because my hope is that this show brought a lot of people to go read that book. And I hope people had a similar positive experience like that. Sounds like
I think it's interesting too, because it's like then you're dealing with like, there will be of course some people who go watch the show and they're like, this is nothing like what I wanted. I wanted the big scares, you know what I mean,
you mean go read the book.
When they go read the book after watching the show, like gotcha. There will be people. It's always the same thing, right? So it's interesting to think of people going the opposite direction, because like book readers tend to be like, this, you know what I mean? This is the way that it happened, and this is the story that I'm accustomed to, and now this is different. But it'd be interesting to know like what group of people would go backwards. But like I said, I've already
let us know if you're a listener who has gone, either book to show or show to book. Let us know, either at Ink to Film on any of our social medias, or in the comment section, or you can always email us, inktofilm@gmail.com. Let us know. I'd love to hear what people think, and
where you landed on it too, obviously. Like, did part of you wish that you read it first, or did you like that you watched it first, and did that sort of inform what you were expecting with the book, and did you enjoy the book in comparison? That's kind of the point of the show here, right? It's like,
let us know. So one thing I gotta highlight, love the soundtrack to this show. There's like like creepy piano that I immediately added it to my writing playlist for when I'm writing like horror stuff. I'm like, this is great.
It's good, yeah.
The moment where she's dancing with her dead husband through the house and everybody's watching, and like we know that she's not,
well, it mirrors the shot that you talked about from the first episode where she's dancing by herself in silence.
Yeah, and it really helps with a lot of what happened in episode 1 to me. It helps bring it back around. I do like the idea of her being handed the necklace and how that was actually the noose. I think it's clever. And then the brutal reveal. It's a good episode, and honestly, I really loved episode 4, but this one is very close. As being like definitely my second favorite of this bunch. Very good. Makes me, obviously these are 2 strong episodes, at the end of what we're covering here, that make me very excited for what's going to come next.
I didn't remember where the halfway point ended up being, but like how amazing of a cliffhanger was that for you to go stop there, and then
it ended up being a good spot. Yeah. I'm definitely intrigued. I predict that we are headed back to the house as a group, obviously. I think it's obvious. And I think there is going to be some sort of doing battle with the house. I think we're going to have some skeptics who are going to need to be convinced, and we're going to have a powerful dark wizard in Theo, who's going to be, one of the key combatants. And I think Luke also has a sensitivity, clearly, because he experienced so much, and I don't know. I'm curious to see how it does. I hope we get more from the father. I hope we get the father's story, and I hope we find out more of the story of that night, and what happened to Olivia. You asked me before to to try and theorize about like what actually happened to her. I don't know. I know that when Hugh Crane comes back to the hotel room, he's covered in blood, and he says it's paint. I don't know if I believe him. He's got sort of a far off look to him. I wonder if maybe he ended up killing her in some way, or, obviously her, as maybe she was being controlled by the house and he had to actually kill her. You would think there'd be more of like an implication that he actually murdered her rather than this sort of accepted story that it was a suicide. I don't know. I'm curious enough to see it. I know that Flanagan is good enough at these reveals to where it should be a surprise, and I'm sure it will be. So I'm excited to see what is actually revealed.
Yeah, a minute ago you were talking about sort of where you thought it was going with like this sort of fight, and you talked about Theo as this dark wizard, and it's funny how much it sounds like a Stephen King novel when you like when you paint it out, and it's like it's so clear that like Mike Flanagan is like a Stephen King guy, like you know that he was reading Stephen King growing up probably, or he's like at least a massive fan. He's adapted tons of his work, and it's interesting because it almost feels like a Shirley Jackson adaptation via Stephen King, if that makes sense.
Maybe
like that's
bit,
his sort of storytelling aspects that he likes to include.
Stephen King is kind of a like a black hole in horror, and I mean that in a good way, in that just that his gravity is immense, and like, you know, I think maybe too often that becomes people's touchstone, and we're maybe giving him too much credit. There are other horror writers who do similar things, but he's just so massive, it's like hard to avoid him and hard to not think about him. And you know, in our defense, Mike Flanagan has done several adaptations for Stephen King, so there's definitely a connection there.
It's hard for there's tons of connections for us too, just from that and all this the King that we've covered. And then there's also this other thing that I read while doing some research. The Red Room, when you say the Red Room, it's kind of a riff on Red Rum.
Red Rum, yeah.
And I hadn't thought of that.
I hadn't thought of that either, but now that you say it, I mean that immediately does make sense. And we have to shout out another scene that is clearly sort of a reimagining, and that's the "Come Home" knell written on the wall, and then they're removing of the wallpaper to see the "Come Home." Actually, I thought that was pretty clever, and she gets in trouble with her mother instead of it being everybody accusing each other of doing it, which is what happens in the book. So it's different, but this is a moment where I didn't mind it. I think it fits this story better.
The "Come Home" thing is like a recurring thing within the show as well, because we saw when obviously the setup was the mother said like, when I've clicked the lights twice it means come home or whatever, when the kids like run out of the house. And then we get the moment when after Shirley's episode, like the little model dream house, like the light flicks on twice, and that's like the same thing as like the "Come Home" knell that's like baked into the wall at some point. That it's all very creepy. Yeah,
creepy. So anyway, good. Enjoying it. Curious to see where it goes. I'm on the record that I hope this show does not end with Hill House burning down in some fashion. We'll see what actually happens. But yeah, I'm definitely excited to see the rest of this thing and to see where they take it.
I didn't see it that long ago, and I'm really enjoying myself just on a second viewing, because like the perspective that you'll get from a second viewing and something like this is really interesting. Cool. Because you sort of see the threads throughout, and it's nice. But if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a rating or review on whatever platform you listen on. iTunes, Spotify, I don't think they have reviews, but leave reviews wherever you can, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and comment on there. It greatly helps other podcasts to keep growing.
And if you'd like to connect with us, we are on social media at Ink to Film on both Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we also have a Goodreads page. You can join that, and we have we usually have a topic for each book we're reading, and we talk about on there. So we'd love to have you over there.
If you wanted to support the podcast in another way, we do have Patreon, patreon.com/Ink2Film. And we have all kinds of tiers, but our $2 tier gets you our bonus content. We put out a monthly episode that's usually about adaptations, some sort of like adaptation adjacent thing. But recently we've done some video content, some rankings, some other stuff like that. So if you're interested in some extra stuff, check out our Patreon.
I think we're going to do the 2017 version of Murder on the Orient Express this month. We haven't recorded it yet, so that is subject to change just in case, but that's the plan. And if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and get on there and you'll see it. I'm interested to see what this new version of that Agatha Christie novel ends up looking like, for sure. Also, we do want to thank Vivek Abhishek, whose music Broken Piano is our intro and outro.
And also a thank you to one of our patrons, Ben E. He's been supporting us for a long time, so shout out to him, and thank you for your continued support.
Absolutely. All right. I am interested to see where we go. Next week will be our final Haunting of Hill House episode, and we'll be checking out of Hill House in some fashion.
But we can never really escape.
We can never really leave. Maybe we'll be there until the end of time. So I want to try something a little different here at the end. Been kicking around a different option. We have our usual sign off, which is a little boring. So I'm gonna try something a little different.
And until next time,
keep adapting.